Hi there, knitters. Welcome to episode 56 of Knit Talk with a Tech Editor. I'm Megan of the Unapologetic Knitter, and I'm a tech editor. We have had a 3-week hiatus since our last video because I was able to go to Rhinebeck this year. And oh my goodness, the colors were amazing. What do they call it? Going leaf peeping? Well, we technically didn't actually go leaf peeping, looking for leaves. Driving up from JFK to Rhinebeck was absolutely gorgeous, if not a little nerve-wracking. But we had a wonderful time at the festival. I will talk a little bit more about that at the end of the episode. What I would like to do is just jump right into today's topic and look at using a swatch that I knit up to talk about adjusting the tension of our stitches. Now, this is not going to be something like changing the tension in terms of gauge swatching. I'm talking about adjusting the tension of 1 or 2 stitches here and there if you have a tension difference between color sections in intarsia work, or if you end up getting a pull in your work that's already completed. We're going to look at my best practices for fixing a pull in your knitting. So let's just jump right into it. So before we look at the actual technique of adjusting the tension of our stitches, let's just take a look at a couple of tools that you have as options to fix your stitches. My preferred tool is this little Fix It tool. It has a crochet hook on one end of it and mimicking a needle tip point on the other. This is probably the equivalent of roughly a US 3 needle. Smaller is generally better for getting under stitches. And the smaller the fabric that you're working on, the smaller your tool will need to be. I'll get to that in a minute, but basically this is the one that I use for anything between, well, any of my projects really, even my fingering weight socks. The other couple of options we have are just if you don't have this little Fix It tool, if you have small gauge cable needles with a pretty good point on them, you can use those. And last but not least, every knitter has needles, whether it's a circular needle or even just the tip if you're using interchangeables. You're just going to be using the tip of your tool, so it doesn't need to be anything fancy. If you have a knitting needle, you can use that. I would just say try to find a needle that's appropriate in size to the project that you're working. So if you have knit something using fingering weight yarn, you probably don't want to use a really large needle because your tip may not be fine enough. But really, you just need something to get under the edge of your stitches. As I say that, I suppose you could even use a toothpick if that's what you had on hand. All right, let's take a look at our swatch. So this swatch has been blocked and dried. I would say for the section where we're going to be fixing a big pull in our work, this will generally be done after it's blocked. If you're fixing the tension of intarsia stitches, you're generally going to do it before you block, but there's really no right or wrong order. I just felt the swatch laid a lot better. As you can tell, we have simply got stockinette stitch worked flat with a garter stitch border here. And at the top, we have got a 3-color intarsia worked piece of color work. So let's begin with a stockinette plain 1-color section. I'm going to get the camera in nice and close here so we can take a look at the stitches. So when I came up with this idea, I was envisioning a situation that my mom experienced on my recent trip home to see her. She had completed a project, tossed the project in a project basket next to her with the potential to weave in ends later before blocking it. When she pulled the project out of her knitting basket, it got caught on a needle that was in her basket. While that's not going to happen for everyone, another example would be, let's say you're out showing off your beautiful new sweater and a friend hugs you and they're wearing a bracelet or they've got a zipper on their coat and it gets caught. When that happens, we end up with a pull in our work. And so I'm going to demonstrate real time what that looks like. So I'm going to put a pull in my work intentionally and then show you how to even out the tension so you don't really notice it anymore. So here we go. I'm just going to take my tool and actually put it under a stitch and just give it a really good pull, as if someone had just leaned in for a huge hug, pulled away, and their bracelet got stuck in it. So when this happened at my mom's house, she was concerned it was actually a dropped stitch that had unraveled, when in fact it was the opposite. The stitch had been pulled out of the work due to an outside force. So now we've got a nice long loop that's about, maybe 1.5 inches on each side. The first thing we want to do is simply try to massage the work horizontally a little bit to see if we can get that tension to even out. So what has happened is, because every stitch adjacent on a row is connected, right? They're just loops that are weaving back and forth between each other. All that has happened is the yarn from the stitches out here has been pulled towards the center and pulled up. So by pulling it out horizontally, it will naturally redistribute some additional yarn from that pull. Now I'm down to about 1 inch on each side. So I managed to pull in roughly 1/2 inch horizontally across my work just by pulling it out sideways. Pulling it vertically isn't going to do anything. Our stitches are not connected vertically in the same way that they are horizontally. Now what I like to do is try to find roughly the center point of the yarn and pull it through the work, so that we're going to be pulling an even amount of yarn horizontally from that center point, because this base here where our 2 loops meet is the center point of the pull. So here's where we're going to grab our tool, and now what we're going to try and do is use the leg of a stitch adjacent, and we're going to use the tip of our tool, I should say, go under the left leg of this adjacent stitch and just pull it through, so that you've got your big loop now roughly split. It doesn't have to be exact, but we just want to have it split so that we're trying to pull the tension evenly to the left and to the right. Next, we're going to repeat that, taking all of the additional tension out of each loop and distributing it sideways. You don't actually have to hold this other half of the loop out of the way, but I find it just a little easier to not have to focus on it too much. So with our pointy tool, and acknowledging that this is now the left leg of the stitch in this column, we're going to try and find the right leg. And here's where a small tool comes in handy. It's been pulled so tight, it's not this one, and it's not this one. It's this one in between. It's been pulled so tight you can hardly see it. We're going to simply use our tool, lift that leg, and pull the tension of that large loop all the way through to the right. Our goal is to try and make the left leg of that stitch be the same size as the adjacent rows of stitch. So now this loop here is still plenty large, but it is a little bit smaller than it was because we've distributed some of that tension into that left leg. We're now going to keep pulling this to the right using the left leg and the right leg of the adjacent stitch alternately. So since this was the right leg of our stitch, we're going to go into the left leg of the adjacent column, squiggle our tool underneath, try and find it, and gently pull up. This one is shrinking, and the one on your tool is getting larger. We're going to repeat this, trying to go between the right leg and then the left leg of the adjacent stitch until all of the tension has been pulled out of that big loop. The reason I say we want to start from the center is we have assumed that you have pulled the same amount of yarn from either side of that center point. So I'm going to keep distributing this tension across the row until there's really no additional slack to take out of that stitch. When I get to what feels like the last stitch, like I'm not going to be able to pull anything out from the adjacent stitches, I'm simply going to go under both legs and give it a little wiggle. What this does is allows the tension on both of these legs in that one column of stitches to be even. Now, I can visually see that these are not perfect all the way across the row. That's okay. We may end up going back and forth across those a few times. But before we try to finesse these stitches, let's get rid of the remaining large loop that's left over from the half that we pulled through at the beginning. So now, rather than working from right to left across our work, we're going to work from right. Did I get that backwards? Instead of working from left to right, evening the tension out, we're now going to work from right to left, evening the tension out. And we're simply going to mirror what we just did. This loop is the left leg of the stitch in this column. So we're going to find, I've got my rights and lefts all backwards. This large loop is the right leg of the stitch in this column. We are going to find the adjacent left leg of the same stitch, lift it up and watch that original loop shrink a little bit until the tension looks even with the other stitches in that column. Next, we're going to go to the right leg of the adjacent stitch, lift it up, and once again, we're going to see it shrink. And we're going to continue this alternating between right and left legs until there's really no tension left or no slack left to be able to pull across our stitches. There we go. All right. And now that I'm at my last stitch, I'll go under both, just give it a little bit of a wiggle to try and even out that tension. Now, to me, some of these stitches look like they are still a little bit wonky. So all I'm going to do is start at the first offensive stitch. I think that's this stitch here. I'm going to go under the right leg, lift it a little bit until the left leg tension corrects itself. Now I'm going to go over to the next stitch, lift the left leg, pull that tension, and repeat. We're just going to do this until it looks like there is no more offending tension in those stitches and they're nice and even across the row. So you may have to go back and forth a couple of times until you feel like everything looks the way you want it to. There we go. That looks like it's ready again for public consumption. If you see any residual difference in tension in your stitches, maybe this one's still a little bit wobbly, know that when you reblock or wash your garment the next time, it should even all out again. You can use this same technique of zhuzhing or fixing your stitches tension across a row in commercially made garments as well. In that case, you'll want to use a much smaller needle tip like the tip of a sewing needle because those are often done with lace weight or thread weight fibers. Now let's take a look at adjusting the tension in color work. In this example, it will specifically be intarsia. If you're not new to this channel, you may have heard me say before how much I dislike color work. I never get my tension right in stranded. However, I do love working in intarsia color work, and that's what I've done here. You can tell or identify intarsia differently from stranded color work because you've got a vertical carry of colors between your column of color changes rather than stranded color work when they run behind the work. So with intarsia, we are changing colors vertically, and when we change to our new color, the tension from the adjacent stitch in the old color no longer applies to the column of new stitches in the new color. So very often you'll have a difference in tension in the last stitch of a section that you've worked and the first stitch of the next section that you're going to work. So unlike when we worked in our stockinette and we had a pull and we worked our tension center out to try and redistribute it, when we're working between color changes and we need to fix our stitches along the edge, we're going to distribute our color within that section of color. So rather than trying to fix any tension problems that we have here by pulling a stitch here, we're going to start at the offending stitch and work into the section of the same color. Let's say that I don't like the tension of this stitch right here. This is the first stitch of this new pinky gray section. I'm going to do the same thing in terms of manipulating the stitch. I'm going to lift the left leg and end up with a little bit of extra tension in this stitch that I will now distribute into the adjacent stitch by lifting the right leg. And then we're going to go to the left leg and the right leg and the left leg until I feel like it's evened out. And just for good measure, I go under both legs at the end of my color, or where I fixed the tension, and go under both legs just to make sure it's nice and smooth. So you'll notice that although I was working with a stitch right at the edge of the work, I didn't try to pull the tension into this section. That's because that color, this pinky gray here, has no tension impact on this purple. Because that section doesn't have any yarns in the purple section, I can't pull tension from here. The tension stops where the color changes. So in this section here, we pulled tension from this first stitch from right to left. You can work the opposite in a different section. Let's say, I don't know, let's say this stitch here is offensive to me. I have to pull the tension from left to right across this panel. I can't pull any tension into this pinky gray section because it's not joined to any of the stitches in this section. So I will simply go under the right leg, pulling on it until I feel like the left leg looks like it's the size that I want it to be. And then I'll move over to the left leg of the adjacent stitch, lift up and get that tension moved over, and repeat, going under the next leg of the same stitch, and then move over a column, pick up the leg, and distribute the tension. When I get to that last one, whoops, I'm going to go under both legs, give it a jiggle, and know that my tension is worked out. So the biggest difference in between fixing a plain stockinette section versus a intarsia section is the method, or the point at which we begin our correction. In a section where it's all one color, you'll start at the center point where you have your large loop, and we're going to distribute our tension horizontally outwards from that center point. In intarsia, you're going to start at the edge of one of your sections and pull left or right across each section to try and fix the tension from the offending stitch outwards. So although I didn't demonstrate it in the top-down look at fixing the tension of our stitches, you could use a really similar technique in your work if you have a difference in tension in your stitches where you join new yarn. Whether it's a new color that you're adding to a project or it's a new skein of the same color that you're using a project, once you've woven in your ends, if you notice that you've got any difference in your tension of your stitches where that join occurs, you can always use the same method of lifting the leg of the adjacent stitches and distributing the tension evenly across a couple of the adjacent stitches so that that location of the join is less noticeable. Certainly, if you can do some of it, if you're trying to fix the tension of your stitches when you're joining a new color, that would be best done before you block, and then blocking will help set any adjustments that you've made to the stitches where you did the join. So there we go. That's zhuzhing, or adjusting the tension of our stitches in our work where we have color changes or where we've got a pull in our work, because it's happened to all of us. So for those of you who are interested, I thought I would just share a little bit about my trip to Rhinebeck this year. I visited Rhinebeck the first time back in 2018 and went with a bit of a business mindset. I was there with a client of mine. We were both going for the first time, and we were really there promoting our sweaters and talking about what we do, hoping to meet the muckety mucks of the industry. This time I went with two of my best knitting friends, and we had a wonderfully relaxed weekend. Actually, very little time was spent at Rhinebeck, but it was still a really magical time. So Becky, Tammy, and I all wore hand knit sweaters, and I'll come back to mine in just a second. Tammy's is a rolled neck turtleneck sweater that she knit up, I think using a cashmere blend. And Becky's is, I believe, the Sunday sweater by Petite Knits using, and I'm going to ruin this, Sneef Nug? I will make sure I link to it below. But it's an absolutely lovely, lightweight yarn that comes in a gorgeous array of colors, especially for this fall and winter season that we're rolling into. It's nice and lightweight, but it's a bulky, or, you know, it might be an Aran weight. I will make sure I include that information in the description below. But it's not too heavy, but it's gorgeous colors, and it knits up at such a lovely gauge. So my sweater started out blue. I know it looks yellow in these pictures. So when I swatched for this sweater, and this is my own design, I got kind of lazy. Instead of swatching a full swatch in the round, I decided I would swatch in the magic loop method. Now, I did still create a full swatch in the round, but I used the magic loop method with the theory that magic loop is my worst case scenario, meaning it is the tightest my gauge will get for my project. If you've worked other designers' patterns, you may have seen comments or notations saying, when you work the sleeve, you may wish to go up a needle size. It's inevitable that the method we use to knit the body of a sweater in the round, so a long circular needle with a nice long cable, which I just happen to have here. So when we're knitting around a really long circumference like this, our tension tends to be more relaxed than when we're working at a small circumference. Now, I am a person who really believes in the magic loop method, so I knit my sleeves using the magic loop method. And I discovered through this sweater that my stitch tension in my sleeve is a full stitch different from the stitch tension in my body. My theory was, if my tension in my sleeve is correct, if my body's just a little bit larger, that's okay. It was not just a little bit larger. I have waxed poetic about this in previous videos talking about gauge, how one stitch can make a big difference. Let me tell you, I'm clapping internally. Let me tell you, my sweater ended up being 2 inches larger than I intended it for it to be because of one stitch difference in my stitch gauge. Not only that, the neckline really stretched out. So my beautiful blue sweater was all done, blocked, ready to go, and I put it on the Sunday morning before I left for Rhinebeck the following Friday, and I was almost in tears. It was a whole size larger than it was meant to be. The collar was too large for me. The sleeves were far too long for me because the width of the body was too long. So what did I do? I rewrote the pattern for my correct gauge, knitting in the round on a large circular needle, and then panic knit the sweater over Sunday evening, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I knew I had to be done on Wednesday night because I had to get it in the blocking bath on Thursday morning so it would be dry by Friday when I left at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I finished the sweater, I bound off and put it in the blocking bath at 4:30 in the morning. I guess it was technically Thursday morning, but Wednesday night. Blocked it, laid it all out to dry, and crawled into bed and got about 2 hours of sleep before the next day. So all that to say, even seasoned vets make really silly mistakes when they are lazy. Lazy sounds really negative, but mostly I thought I knew better. Let me tell you, folks, I didn't. Swatch properly. It'll save your sanity. But all that to say, I still got to wear a lovely handmade Rhinebeck sweater that I was super proud of, and I had the joy of meeting a couple of my clients that I had been working with for a year or more, some of them 5 or 6 years, in person for the first time. So it was really special to connect with them at a festival where we were all there just relaxing and enjoying ourselves, and I got to take a few photos with them. Unlike many knitters who go to Rhinebeck, I went with my spinner's hat on this year. So I ended up buying no yarn, but I did buy 3 1-pound bundles, no, half-pound bundles, 8 ounces. Half-pound bundles of fiber. So I got myself a Tweedy Shetland, which is quite pretty. I got myself a specialty fiber. I picked up camel, which I have never spun with before, so I'm excited about that. And I also picked up myself a gorgeous chocolate brown fin sheep, which I have never used before either. So it'll be a big winter of learning how to spin these different fibers, but I'm quite excited about it. I was also very fortunate to get to meet the Clems brothers of Clems and Clems. They are fiber folks who have been around for quite a long time, and they make blending drums, carding drums, there we go, so that you can create your own color combinations or create your own fiber blends, which is really what I was going for. I tend to work with more neutral colors of the yarn, undyed fibers, I guess I should say. And so I wanted to try blending, say, Shetland with the camel. So that's what I treated myself to. I did also get to meet the wonderful folks from Woolly Winder, and I purchased myself an electric bobbin winder, which I am very excited about. That should arrive any day now, and I can't wait to take some fiber, well, I guess it's technically now yarn, off some bobbins and put them onto some storage bobbins so I can get to plying those over the winter. So if you have stuck around to this point, congratulations. I know that was a lot of me just talking about a trip I took, not anything technical that you could learn from. Since a lot of folks love my dogs, here are some adorable photos of my dogs wearing their new raincoats. We are actually heading back up to Canada for Christmas this year. My mother-in-law is having a knee surgery in November, which would make it hard for her to travel in December. So we've decided to rent a van. Yes, a van, pack up the dogs and drive home for Christmas, which we have not done in about 6 years. So I'm pretty excited about that. On the trip, we expect there will probably be a lot of snow or rain. So we got our dogs some full body rain suits to try and keep them a little cleaner. Callie probably wouldn't have any issues, but with Moo's long fur, the snow tends to collect and create little balls of snow all over his legs and belly that I don't want him traipsing through my parents' house. So we got them these really cute raincoats from a company called Gold Paw out of Minnesota. And they tolerate them. They pretend like their back knees don't work anymore, but they wear them just fine. And we've tested it out in our rains here now that they have finally arrived. Thank you so much for joining me today. Oh, and 2 weeks time, we're going to get back to our regularly scheduled videos every 2 weeks. Next video, we're going to do another top-down look. I thought it would be prudent to look at identifying stitch orientation. When we have to repair our work, we often have to pull the needles out, whether we're dropping down or whether we're actually tinking or frogging a section of our work, and we have to put the stitches back on our needle. I thought it would be good to just take a little peek at stitch orientation to make sure that we're not ending up twisting our stitches. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and as always, happy knitting.